welcome back to today's Daily English Look. So you've probably had this experience, that terrible cycle where you find yourself just mindlessly consuming content.
Oh, absolutely.
We know it's intellectually empty, but it's just stimulating enough to keep your monetizable eyeballs glued to the screen.
Right.
That's what we're talking about today, brainrot. That feeling when you look up after, 20 minutes of scrolling, and you realize you have gained absolutely nothing.
You don't even feel rested.
No, not at all. You feel this sort of deep ambivalence. It's a way to switch off, sure, but it's also just hours lost, forever.
And that's what's so interesting.
So our mission today is to dive into a pretty radical shift that's happening in economic thought. We're trying to move the conversation about distraction away from just, a personal failing.
Well, away from a lack of willpower.
Exactly. Towards something much more structural, a kind of an economic theft. Economists are now starting to formally model attention itself as a scarce resource.
Right alongside land, labor, and capital.
And this is so critical because, attention is scarce and it's rivalrous. Every moment you spend scrolling is a moment you can't spend, reading a book or talking to someone or doing your work. Your pool of focus is finite.
And that framework, that's the missing link. For decades, economists have sort of struggled with this. They had their idealized figure, Homo economicus.
The perfectly rational actor.
Perfectly rational actor who always makes the best decision. And then they had the messy, biased, easily distracted person we see in behavioral experiments.
And they couldn't make them fit.
Not really, but by defining attention as this quantifiable, scarce resource, we start to see that the rational part of Homo economicus hasn't just disappeared. It's run up against a wall of information. The problem isn't a failure of maximizing wants, it's a failure of maximizing focus.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Where did the traditional rational models first start to break down?
Well, we can look at a really common bias one you see every day.
Left digit bias.
Left digit bias. The sources talk about how consumers consistently see something priced at, say, $2.99 as significantly cheaper than $3.
Right, that jump across the dollar mark feels huge.
It does, but here's the fascinating part. Those same consumers show almost no difference in their behavior between an item at $2.99 and one at $2.98.
So why is that? Why bother to read the rest of the price?
Because the mental cost of processing those last two digits, it outweighs the value of that extra penny. Your brain takes a shortcut to save energy. It's focused on the most important piece of information, the left digit.
So even just reading a price tag shows the limits of perfect rationality.
Exactly. And if that's true for a price tag, what does that say about trying to process global market news?
Which brings us to Herbert Simon,
the father of this whole field. And he wasn't just an economist. Mann was a polymath. He won a Turing Award for AI and a Nobel Prize in economics.
That's an incredible resume. So what was his big argument?
He basically said that economists were modeling mythical creatures. We had to stop assuming people were these all-knowing optimizers. He introduced the model of bounded rationality.
Bounded rationality.
Right. People aren't maximizing satisfaction by crunching every last piece of data. He said they're satisficing.
Satisficing. So you choose an option that's just good enough.
Exactly. Just good enough given your limits. You're not searching for the absolute perfect solution because the time, and more importantly, the attention required to find it, is itself just too costly.
I find Simon's big realization on this, it's genuinely chilling because he basically predicted the world we live in now.
He really did.
He wrote, "What information consumes is rather obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It consumes the attention of its recipients. A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention."
And that perfectly describes the smartphone era, doesn't it? If the fundamental economic problem is unlimited wants and scarce resources, then in our world, attention had become the ultimate scarce resource.
That makes so much sense. But if we accept we're all boundedly rational, does that just mean we're, lazy? Is there a rational reason not to read every headline?
That's where Christopher Sims comes in. He took Simon's idea and he built a formal mathematical framework for it. He called it rational inattention.
Rational inattention.
And Sims basically proved that choosing not to pay attention can be a completely rational optimization strategy.
So.
Well, he modeled agents who are trying to optimize, but they have a processing limit. Like a computer. You can only run so many programs at once before things slow down.
So we're not just ignoring the news. We are, in a way, rationally allocating our scarce attention budget to what's most important right now.
Precisely. And this has huge real-world implications, especially for macroeconomics. It explains why big things like interest rates or consumer prices, they adjust smoothly.
Not instantly.
Not instantly. Because people aren't machines that react to every news bulletin. They sensibly dedicate just a small fraction of their attention to market news, and they update their beliefs over time. They're budgeting their focus just like they budget their money.
Okay, that really grounds the whole discussion. We know attention is scarce, and we ration it. But to call it a true economic resource, we have to get, really specific. What do we even mean when we say pay attention?
That's the tricky part.
A recent review by George Lowenstein and Zachary Wojtowicz tries to formalize this. They define attention as the selective allocation of a scarce, rivalrous mental resource to a task.
And that mental resource includes a few different things.
Right, things like your working memory, selective concentration, and even just pure visual focus. But they also point out a big definitional problem.
Yes, the aggregation problem. In normal conversation, pay attention is a catch-all phrase.
It could mean, look at this ad.
Or it could mean stop daydreaming about your vacation.
Which are two very different mental actions.
Very different. One is external, one is internal. But for an economic model, they get lumped together under the single heading of attention.
Is that a new problem for economics?
Not at all. We faced a similar issue trying to categorize, everything from factory machines to intellectual property under the single banner of capital. It's messy, but you have to aggregate if you want to apply economic tools.
So once we have this aggregated resource, how do we decide where to spend it? I mean, are we in control or is something else choosing for us?
And that is where it gets really interesting, because the models generally divide attention into two types. And one of them is, it's highly involuntary.
Okay.
So the first is the top-down model. This is the classic economic paradigm. The agent, that's you, is in control. You choose the best use of your attention.
Like when you're driving a familiar route.
A perfect example. Once you've mastered it, driving can get a little dull, so you rationally choose to allocate some of that free attention to, making a phone call or thinking about dinner. You are directing your focus.
But so much of modern life feels like the opposite of that. It feels like the environment is constantly hijacking our focus.
It is, and that's the bottom-up model. This is where the environment directs your attention. Your focus is commandeered involuntarily.
Like the ping of a new message.
Exactly, that notification that breaks your concentration. Or something more dramatic, like a child running into the road. Your attention just snaps to that input, regardless of what your rational, top-down plan was.
And Lowenstein and Wojtowicz take this even further into what might be the most exciting territory here. The emotional element.
Which is a huge step for the discipline. They point out that our emotional states are incredibly powerful, involuntary directors of attention.
For instance, pain.
Pain is almost impossible to ignore. Boredom is inherently unpleasant, so it forces you to search for some kind of external stimulation. Hunger makes it nearly impossible to focus on anything but food.
So I'm trying to read a complicated report, but I'm hungry and I'm bored. Those internal emotional states are actively stealing my working memory and concentration.
They're pulling you away from the task.
Precisely.
And if economics starts to formally incorporate this inner life of homo economicus, these emotional drivers that steal our focus, it suggests a fundamental shift in how we understand decision-making. It's an acknowledgement that we aren't just calculating machines.
We're complex organisms driven by feelings that can just hijack the steering wheel. Which brings us right back to where we started, to brain rot. And why our willpower seems to fail so spectacularly against it. We're fighting a structural battle against a hostile environment.
Yes.
Let's go back to Simon's analogy. He said decisions are shaped by the two blades of a pair of scissors. One blade is our own cognitive limits, our bounded rationality. The other blade is the informational environment.
And our limits haven't changed.
No, our limits are the same. But the environment. It's become this perfectly tuned distraction machine. Algorithms are constantly adjusting to maximize your engagement. They're learning exactly which bottom-up emotional cue, surprise, anger, boredom will capture your focus next.
And this brings us to what might be the single most critical insight from the source material. The crux of the problem. It's about property rights.
Property rights for attention.
Exactly. If attention is a resource, like land or capital, it's currently not covered by any property rights.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, think about it. If I steal your labor, there are laws, there are contracts, there are ways to get restitution. If I steal your car, you either get it back or I go to jail.
Right.
But if a clever app design or an optimizing algorithm steals hours of your finite, rivalrous attention, there is, and I'm quoting here, no hope of restitution. The platform that benefits incurs no cost for this theft, only profit.
Wow. So the spread of smartphones, in this context, is the ultimate market failure. A system where the theft of our most fundamental cognitive resource is easy, it's consequence-free, and it's highly profitable.
Which is why the solutions have to go beyond just telling people to, be more disciplined. We're talking about a failure in market design.
So what can we do? What kind of interventions are being considered to return this stolen resource to its owners?
The sources point to three layers of intervention. The first one is social norms.
Okay.
We can look at a space like a library. They insist on silence, right? They do that specifically to preserve the scarce resource of focused attention for everyone in that room. We need to build new digital equivalents of that kind of social contract.
And the second layer?
Future regulation. I mean, since we can't really assign property rights to attention itself, maybe regulation has to focus on the environment.
You mean regulate the apps themselves?
It could mean mandating things like digital friction design features that intentionally slow down the capture of attention, or even banning specific persuasive design tricks that we know exploit our involuntary bottom-up weaknesses.
That's a fascinating thought. Making the distraction machine a little harder to use instead of just expecting the user to be perfectly resistant.
Right. But for now,
Mhm.
the most immediate and effective action is still personal.
So it does come back to us.
In a way, if you are serious about reclaiming your attention for, say, a challenging task, the answer, as unsatisfying as it sounds, is to remove the hostile environment entirely. Physically put your phone far, far away.
Not just on silent.
No, not just muted, out of sight and out of reach.
Yeah.
You are temporarily creating your own property rights by putting up a physical barrier against the theft.
So let's sum this up. We started with that common, frustrating experience of brain rot, and we've landed on a powerful economic framework for understanding why focus is so hard to come by in the modern world. We've formally defined attention as a scarce, rivalrous resource. We've connected historical ideas like Simon's bounded rationality and Sim's rational inattention with this modern crisis of distraction and theft.
It's all connected.
I think the big takeaway for you, the listener, is that you now have the economic vocabulary, Simon, satisficing to understand that your difficulty focusing isn't just a personal failing.
It's not a lack of discipline.
It's a structural economic battle. You are constantly fighting against systems specifically designed to exploit your cognitive limits and steal your most valuable finite resource for profit. And just knowing that it's a structural battle, not a moral failure, that changes everything.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought. The source material strongly suggests that economists are being pushed, maybe for the first time, into studying the emotional states that direct our attention, things like pain, hunger, and, really critically, boredom.
Right.
So if the field of economics truly starts to incorporate this involuntary emotional steering of our focus into its models, what fundamental changes might we see in how companies and maybe even governments try to capture and manage our attention? If boredom is what drives us to seek out stimulating brain rot, what is the true quantifiable economic value of feeling bored?
All right, that's all for today's episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, save, and follow. Your support is the motivation that drives my progress.